and welcome to episode 59 of Toke Signals TV, where we bring you the biggest in cannabis and hemp news stories every week. I'm Steve Elliott, your host. I edit tokesignals.com, and I'll be guiding you through the news. First of all, let's look at our bud pick of the week. We got something a little different this week. We have here a Happy Garden of Sativa, somewhere in the Philippines, sent in by a listener and reader. Very healthy looking plants there. Let's do the news now, shall we? In Washington this week, marijuana retailers are hoping that the fall harvest will lower prices and combat the black market. With licensed producers of marijuana bringing in autumn's outdoor harvest, retailers who own the recreational cannabis stores created by limited legalization measure I-502 are hoping to lower prices enough to diminish the black market in Washington state, which was one of the main justifications for the law passed by state voters 2 years ago. But the most that store owners like Mary Vander Graaf, owner of Mill Creek A, one of 2 licensed marijuana shops in Union Gap, Washington, can hope for, is making a bit of a dent in the black market. We'll slow it down, yeah, Vander Graaf said. But even with I-502 store owners like Vander Graaf, even they have to admit that legalizing recreational marijuana has done almost nothing to combat black market street sales, where dealers don't pay taxes or check the ages of their customers. Washington's brand of limited legalization apparently hasn't made any dent at all in illegal grows. In fact, there's an increase this year in illegal grows on tribal lands, public lands, and in backyards, according to Jody Underwood, a spokeswoman for the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration's regional office in Seattle. On Monday, law enforcement confiscated 20 pounds of processed marijuana and 43 plants in Zillow, Washington. Police arrested 2 men that same day for stealing medical marijuana from a home in Selah. I have customers come in and say they would like to buy from me, but it's just so much cheaper on the black market, Vander Graaf said. So can a system of legalization truly said to be working when it taxes and the regulatory structure are so onerous that few consumers want to buy $25 to $40 a gram weed? Clients have so far been predominantly affluent, not surprisingly, and predominantly visitors to the state, according to Vander Graaf. Many prospective buyers come into the stores, look at a few flowers, and say they like the idea of buying marijuana legally, but admit they plan on sticking with knowing a guy until prices come down to something resembling reasonable. Retailers are reportedly paying $8 to $15 a gram, ironically about the same price as both black market street marijuana and cannabis bought from medical dispensaries. But that's retail, mind you, and they need a markup to stay in business. So store owners then charge $25 to $40 a gram to cover payroll, operating expenses, and taxes. The state charges a 25% excise tax on all retail sales, and the federal government charges store owners income tax but allows no deductions. Marijuana is still illegal under federal law. Vander Graaf and her competitors hope the extra supply from outdoor sun-grown harvests will allow them to cut prices sometime this fall. That's when we foresee the price coming down, is when the outdoor stuff starts harvesting, said Tim Thompson, owner of Altitude in Prosser. They hope at that point to finally start luring at least a few customers away from the much less expensive black market. I think at $15 per gram we would, Thompson said hopefully. Adam Marcus, who owns Station 420 in Union Gap, predicts prices will fall by half, but not for long. He expects prices will go back up again once retailers sell out of outdoor grown weed. I hope I'm wrong, Marcus said. In California this week, a study was released which refutes claims of widespread abuse in that state's medical marijuana program. 92% of participants in the study reported that medical marijuana helped alleviate symptoms or treat a serious medical condition. This new landmark study was published last week by the peer-reviewed journal Drug and Alcohol Review, and it refutes this long-held belief that abuse of California's medical marijuana law is widespread. California is typically held up as the bad example, as in we don't want to be like California when a state is considering medical marijuana legislation. Apparently, it's not so bad at all. This study, Prevalence of Medical Marijuana Use in California, 2012, It is the first time anyone has formally measured such data in the state, according to its authors, Suzanne Ryan Ibarra, Marta Nduni, and Danielle Ewing of the Survey Research Group at Public Health Institute in Sacramento. This report found that as much as 92% of participants reported medical marijuana helped alleviate symptoms or treat a serious medical condition. And researchers noted that to get that kind of agreement on anything is pretty astounding. 92%. The report also found that 1 in 20 California adults, roughly 1.4 million people, reported using medical marijuana to treat serious illness, and that such use spanned all ages, genders, races, and geographical regions. This study proves what patients and advocates have been saying for years, that medical marijuana is efficacious, said Don Duncan, California Director with Americans for Safe Access. The study roundly rejects the argument that medical cannabis is a smokescreen or a sham. Researchers said their study contradicts commonly held beliefs that medical marijuana is being overused by healthy individuals. They also said that it found a perception persists that medical marijuana users may not need to use it to treat a serious medical condition. The researchers used data from the California Behavioral Risk Factor Surveillance System 2012, an annual random digit dialed statewide telephone survey that collected health data from a representative adult sample of more than 7,500 people. Evidence from randomized controlled trials suggests that cannabinoids can improve the quality of life by improving sleep, increasing appetite, and reducing chronic pain for people with chronic conditions, especially when these conditions do not respond to conventional treatments, according to the researchers. This study showed that the most commonly reported conditions for medical marijuana in California were chronic pain, arthritis, migraines, and cancer. Other reported conditions included AIDS, glaucoma, muscle spasms, nausea, stress, and depression. The researchers noted that the results from this survey are well recognized as accurately measuring health-related behaviors, and data from this survey have been used for the past 3 decades to provide information on prevalence of health-related behaviors among population groups in states and the nation. Since the passage of California's Compassionate Use Act in 1996, claims of widespread medical marijuana abuse have come from detractors and opponents, inside and outside of California. Largely as a result of this stigma, more than 200 municipalities across California have banned legal access to medical marijuana. Earlier this year, the former president of the California Police Chiefs Association, Kim Ramey, said that the application of the state's medical marijuana law is, quote, fraudulent, which echoed the sentiments of top law enforcement lobbyist John Lovell, who called the law a giant con job. In Maryland this week, marijuana decriminalization takes effect Wednesday. Legislation adopted this year to remove criminal penalties for marijuana possession in the state of Maryland went into effect on Wednesday, October the 1st. Maryland thus joined 17 other states in the District of Columbia that have decriminalized or legalized marijuana possession. In addition, Missouri passed a similar bill this year, which will make it the 19th state to do so when it goes into effect. Senate Bill 364 makes possession of less than 10 grams of marijuana a civil offense, punishable by a fine of up to $100 for a first offense, up to $250 for a second offense, and up to $500 for subsequent offenses. Third-time offenders and individuals under 21 years of age will be required to undergo a clinical assessment for substance abuse disorder and a drug education program. Decriminalization will free up law enforcement officials' time and allow them to focus on more pressing issues than marijuana possession, said Major Neil Franklin, Executive Director of Law Enforcement Against Prohibition and a 34-year veteran of the Maryland State Police. It will address some inequalities in our justice system, but until we fully legalize and regulate marijuana, sales will continue to be conducted by criminals in an underground market, Franklin said. Until that happens, we are not going to see the public safety benefits that are possible in a post-prohibition world. Decriminalizing possession of marijuana is a key step on the road to saner drug policy in Maryland, according to Sarah Love, Public Policy Director for the ACLU of Maryland. For too long, tens of thousands of Marylanders, disproportionately black Marylanders, have faced life-altering criminal penalties simply for possessing a substance most voters believe should be legalized. Going forward, we hope that legislators will seriously consider sensible legislation to regulate and tax marijuana, Love said. Maryland's marijuana policy is headed in the right direction, according to Rachel Young, legislative analyst for the Marijuana Policy Project. Marijuana is objectively less harmful than alcohol, and it should be treated that way, Young said. Removing criminal penalties for possession is a good start, but when it comes to adults using it responsibly, there's no reason why there should be any penalty, Young said. It's time to take marijuana out of the underground market, regulate it, and start taxing it like alcohol. In Pennsylvania this week, the mayor of Philadelphia signed marijuana decriminalization into law. Philadelphia Mayor Michael Nutter on Wednesday signed a bill into law that replaces criminal penalties for possession of small amounts of marijuana with a civil fine similar to a traffic ticket. After stalling for much of the summer, the mayor finally agreed to sign a compromise bill approved on September 18th by the Philadelphia City Council, and this new ordinance will take effect on October 20th. The initial version of the bill approved by the council on June 19th made possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana a civil offense punishable by a $25 fine. Following negotiations between Mayor Nutter and members of the council, the bill was amended to include a $100 fine for public consumption of marijuana. Current Philadelphia law requires police officers to make custodial arrests when they encounter people in possession of any amount of marijuana. And possession of up to 1 ounce of marijuana is punishable by up to 90 days in jail, a $200 fine, and compulsory participation in a drug treatment program. Under current Pennsylvania state law, possession of up to 30 grams of marijuana is a misdemeanor, punishable by up to 30 days in jail and a fine of up to $500. Philadelphia voters and their elected city officials are fed up with laws that criminalize people for possessing a substance that is less harmful than alcohol, said Rachel Young of the Marijuana Policy Project. They disproportionately impact communities of color and do nothing to make people safer. We applaud city officials for taking this important step towards a more sensible marijuana policy. It's time for the rest of the state to follow its lead, Young said. Weird story from Maine this week, where we had men dressed as law enforcement stealing medical marijuana plants. Police are pursuing numerous leads in the case of 3 men impersonating law enforcement officers, 2 of them dressed in black SWAT team gear and one wearing a sheriff's office uniform and armed with a handgun, who robbed the medical marijuana patient of her garden. We have 2 very good leads on the identity of 2 of the suspects and a possible lead on the identity of the third, said Lieutenant Aaron Hayden of the Maine State Police on Thursday morning. The detail Lieutenant Hayden would release about the 3 suspects is that they are from Maine. Hayden said on Tuesday that the landowner is a legal medical marijuana patient. The 3 men went to the garden in Winterport, Maine, wearing clothing impersonating law enforcement personnel at about 7:30 a.m. on September 21st, according to spokesman Stephen McCausland of the Maine Department of Public Safety. After getting into an argument with the landowner, the men grabbed armfuls of mature flowering marijuana plants ready for harvest and reportedly took off running with them. The faces of 2 of the 3 men are clearly visible in surveillance camera images released on Monday afternoon by Maine State Police. Investigators said they believe the armed man was carrying a semi-automatic pistol. We received dozens of leads via Facebook and probably another dozen that came through the phone, Hayden said. I have investigators conducting follow-ups and we're going to meet with the prosecutors. It turns out Winterport isn't the only community in Maine being hit by medical marijuana thieves, according to Lieutenant Hayden. He said similar pot thefts had occurred in the past month in Standish and in Lewiston. I did not believe they are connected, Hayden said of the 3 thefts. The Lewiston one is solved, and I'm not sure about the Standish details. I would not connect them at this point. After a week of working with local police, surprise, surprise, failed to turn up any suspects, the decision was made to release the surveillance photos from Winterport, according to Hayden. Within hours of posting those pictures on Facebook, state police had the names of potential suspects. Armed robbery with the threat of force carries a penalty of up to 10 years in prison as a Class B crime in Maine. Impersonating a public official is a misdemeanor Class E crime, but can be elevated if committed in connection with another crime, as this was. The marijuana theft could also be a felony, according to Hayden. Marijuana is going for between $600 and $2,500 a pound, according to Lieutenant Hayden. And depending on what the court recommends as the value of the pot, that could be a felony. In New Mexico this week, credit unions said they are closing the accounts of licensed medical marijuana producers, closing the bank accounts. 8 months after the Federal Department of Justice and the Treasury Department announced new guidelines allowing banks to work with marijuana businesses, Some of the credit unions in New Mexico sent letters to almost half of the state's licensed medical marijuana producers saying they will no longer accept their business and proceeded to close their accounts. The credit unions claim that they are unable to comply with federal guidelines for servicing those accounts. This move leaves producers in the lurch, with either having to operate on a cash-only basis or scramble to find another financial institution willing to take on their business. In February, the Obama administration had announced new guidelines that will allow banks to legally provide financial services to state-licensed marijuana businesses. 23 states and Washington, D.C. have legalized marijuana for medical use. Two of those states, Colorado and Washington, recently legalized marijuana like alcohol. It's disappointing to see that the banking industry in New Mexico is failing to protect medical patients and small businesses in light of the assurances the federal administration has provided in a robust and thriving medical marijuana industry in the state, said Emily Kaltenbach, State Director for the Drug Policy Alliance. This abrupt move has all of us asking why they are unexpectedly ceasing to do business with the marijuana industry in New Mexico. We'd like to know why they are unable to comply with the federal guidelines, Kaltenbach said. Many banks have been afraid to open checking or saving accounts for legalized marijuana businesses out of fear of breaking federal law. As a result, these businesses are forced to deal with large amounts of cash, potentially creating a public safety risk for the industry. Even though the federal government is okay with banks and credit unions taking cannabis business deposits, they are not doing it in New Mexico, said Lynn Goodman, the executive director of New Mexican, who received a letter from the State Employees Credit Union, SECU, dropping their account. We will not know for a few days or weeks whether we can find a workaround with other kinds of financial institutions or not. In the meantime, starting this Wednesday, all transactions will be cash only. The licensed producers who have received letters are having trouble finding other financial institutions in the state willing to take their business. In Washington State this week, Spokane is considering testing sewage to measure marijuana use. That's right, Allison Holcomb seems to trust poop more than people. The author of Washington State's recreational marijuana law has suggested that the city of Spokane test its sewage for traces of cannabis in order to more accurately measure use by residents. Holcomb, a lawyer with the ACLU, proposed the idea at a Tuesday meeting of the Spokane City Council's Marijuana Policy Subcommittee. About 50 city leaders and residents make up the subcommittee, which attempts to deal with what cannabis legalization means for Spokane, a city of about 210,000 people. We don't have really good data on usage and perceptions of harm, said City Councilman John Snyder. It's funny how the sewage thing has really captured people's imagination. A University of Washington scientist liked the idea. It's always good for a chuckle, but it actually does work, said Caleb Banta Green, researcher at the UW's Alcohol and Drug Abuse Institute. Banta Green, an epidemiologist, has tested sewage in Oregon and Washington for the presence of hard drugs like methamphetamine and cocaine. In some ways, I think my most surprising finding is that it works, he said. When I first heard about it, I was skeptical, Banta Green said. I thought, how is this going to be sensitive enough? He and two chemists teamed up to study tiny quantities of drug metabolites in sewage, measuring parts per billion with a mass spectrometer. Holcomb said on Wednesday that treating sewage for THC provides a more accurate measure of usage trends than self-reporting on surveys in which people are asked about their marijuana use. People often give inaccurate information when questioned about smoking pot, she said. We can expect to see more honesty in the sewage than from people, Holcomb said, revealing a rather discouraging view of human nature. We can learn a lot by testing for the presence of drugs in sewage, according to Banta Green, though. Testing will provide a more accurate picture of the quantities of various drugs a community is consuming, he said, and would even provide over time a picture of which days people use more heavily. Holcomb said that Washington policymakers are very interested in knowing whether legalization will result in increased marijuana use. Looking at wastewater gives us a more accurate way to observe trends, she said. If we store those samples now, we might be in a better place in 2 years to calibrate those samples, according to Banta Green, explaining that the sewage could be frozen and tested later. I hope you'll choose to join us again on Toke Signals next week. Until then, stay lifted.